Okay, colleagues. So I wanted to do a quick video, um, basically reading through examiners' commentaries. So as you know, we have 6 weeks approximately before the exam, which is on the one hand not much, but on the other hand, a certain amount of time. And I thought we'd take stock. So basically, what I want to emphasize in the commentaries we're going to read in a second is the amount of depth, potentially, that the University of London would want us to show, especially if students want to get first-class honors. And obviously, it depends on how much time you have and how much effort you want to put into your studies. I understand people may have different priorities, and I also understand you have a lot of subjects to prepare for. Obviously, modern political theory is not your only subject. But on the one hand, but having said that, 6 weeks is a fair amount of time. So basically, as we read through these commentaries, in some sense, what I have at the back of my head is the notion that hopefully the best students among you have already mastered the study guide, and Costco, who's not listed as a main, as actually any kind of reading for this course. Costco is entirely unofficial. However, I do think that Costco is highly appropriate at the same time. So we have study guide, Costco, and voucher. Very importantly, voucher. So if we have those texts behind our belts, where can we go from there? So in addition to Costco and voucher and study guide, obviously, we do have several other sources. I mean, obviously, there's Khan, there's introductions in Khan, there's also Ellen Ryan on politics, and Cambridge editors' introductions, in the Blue Book series, right? The editors' introductions to the texts that we are reading are usually very good. In fact, in all three cases, Hobbes, Hegel, and Rousseau, introductions are excellent. And Rousseau, for example, has 2 introductions to the early works, Second Discourse, and later works, especially Social Contract. So I do highly recommend you take a look at them. And but in addition to Costco and Khan and all the rest of them, right? In some sense, the question is, should we read deeper? Should we go deeper? And the short answer is yes. If you want first-class honors, I think that, again, in the span of time that we have, these six weeks can be used to go deeper, especially to look at book-length material and to look maybe at advanced articles. And in some sense, what I want to do is I want to look at the exam commentaries and I want to justify my position. I want to explain why I think it is a good idea. So anyway, so these are examiners' commentaries 2019. Everybody should have taken a look at it at some point. So obviously we have Boucher and Kelly, Khan listed here. These are our main texts. And Boucher and Kelly, in a very important respect, should be our starting point for looking for further reading, and we'll see this. Anyway, so let me start. Just in some sense, I think it's useful to just look at these things carefully, even though we technically were supposed to look at this before and read this before. Everybody has skimmed this over, glazed our eyes over this information, but still, I think it's important. Anyway, so general remarks, learning outcomes. At the end of this course, having completed essential reading and activities, you should be able to demonstrate familiarity with the main ideas of thinkers discussed in the subject guide. So this is basic, right? And everybody understands this, that in your exam, you should demonstrate a familiarity with the main ideas of the thinkers discussed in the subject guide, right? So, sort of, if I were to comment on this, I would say that questions can be interpreted narrowly and they can be interpreted broadly. So basically, it's like if I were to try to summarize this, I would say that we need to interpret the question as broadly as possible without sacrificing depth. So interpret, wow, I can't spell this. Interpret the question as broadly as possible, but very importantly, without sacrificing depth. Now, I think depth is more important than breadth, and we will see this I mean, like, exam commentaries are going to talk about this in a second. We will read through this, but at the same time, I I think that being broad is also important, and especially so, like for example, this question that we had about sovereignty by institution and by acquisition. Yeah, you could go very deeply into that issue on its own, but I think a better strategy is to situate this within the general framework of Hobbes's philosophy and explain Hobbes's philosophy. And like with every thinker, you have a chance to score points, by mentioning certain important conceptual elements of the thinker's philosophy. So, like again, if you talk about Hobbes and you talk about sovereignty by institution or by acquisition, it is a good idea, I think, to mention that you understand the state of nature and maybe some nuances from the state of nature. So again, like you have to, in some sense, your main focus has to be on depth of presentation, but it's like highly unlikely that you'll be able to write 1,000 words or maybe more, who knows, especially those of you who type fast will be able to write more than 1,000 words. So like what I'm saying is that I think it's valuable to be somewhat broad without sacrificing depth. Okay, let me move on. So the second one, provide an account of the main concepts used by the thinkers in the course. Okay, yeah, that's the same, basically the same as number one. Number three. Now this is crucial. It's crucial. If I can highlight this in red or something, I wonder if I can highlight in red, because evaluate strengths and weaknesses of the arguments employed in the theories that we study. So I think it's absolutely crucial to understand this, right? So it's like any question, it doesn't matter what the wording is of the University of London question, you must devote a significant portion of your answer to evaluating strengths and weaknesses of the argument employed by the philosopher. And I think again, like understanding the strengths and weaknesses is this like a dancing back and forth movement. So you have to, on the one hand, if you want you have to explain the argument of the philosopher. Then dancing from there, you explain the counter arguments against his position, and then hopefully you should be able to maybe give some kind of preliminary defense of the thinker. And we'll read this in a second, but the study guide urges you to be sympathetic to the thinker, as sympathetic as you can. And even if you have to criticize them at the end, you have to acknowledge their contribution and their depth, because after all, these philosophers, these 6 names, were very carefully chosen by the University of London. So these people are not idiots, right? So even if you disagree with them, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, and you have to try to present the picture in the best light possible. Not to mention, like in general, how can you criticize a thinker if you haven't really understood what they're talking about? Like it doesn't seem it doesn't seem appropriate, philosophically speaking. Anyway, so formulate your own interpretation of the thinkers covered using the model, essay, and exam questions. So this is also important. So you evaluate the strengths and the weaknesses, and in some sense, evaluating strengths and weaknesses is more about retelling common arguments and counter arguments, and maybe counter arguments, right? However, this fourth part that talks about formulating your own interpretation, this is related but somewhat different. So again, in this third learning outcome presupposes your familiarity with arguments, and the fourth presupposes your own original position. And there are many reasons why I do not like model answers. Partly because I'm not sure that either you or me are capable of producing model answers at this stage, honestly, because I feel that sort of in some sense we can improve any answer. And not to mention that, of course, University of London values originality. And I think there's a very high chance that your papers will be graded side by side. And if they see the same thing being repeated over and over and over again, you basically get marks off for lack of originality. So again, model answers are a bad idea for all sorts of reasons. I think model answers are a horrible idea if you want first class. But among other things, again, University of London here explicitly says that they are looking for your original input, your original interpretation. So like, and the simplest way to do this is when you summarize the debate around the thinker. So you give the arguments for their position, and you give the arguments against, and maybe counter arguments to those counter arguments, right? You can then take a stand, and presumably this stand is going to be your own stand, right? Anyway, so let's continue. Let's read on. So the format of the examination. So please be careful. This is the old format. The new format is 6 questions. So let me skip over all of this. Yeah, and especially it's kind of interesting. They talk about this repetition of material in two distinct answers will be marked down. So this no longer applies. This no longer applies. So maybe I should do it this way. Maybe I should strike this through to signal that this no longer applies. Yeah. So and and I think there's a deep what's the right phrase? There's a deep implication in the fact that the format has changed, because in the past, most students were writing two questions on the same thinker. So this meant that they had to be very focused on the question and make sure to try to not repeat material. But now, since you're only answering one question, I want to take this as I want you to take this as an invitation to write more broadly. However, again, as I said before, being broad without sacrificing depth. And among other things, again, so being broad without sacrificing depth, one immediate way to do this is, again, if the question, let's say you're talking about Hobbes and you want to focus, let's say, on the state of nature, be brief in your discussion of sovereignty. Signal to the examiners that you understand that there's all these issues around sovereignty, but also signal to them that you understand that these are not the main issues. Likewise, if you talk about sovereignty, you have to show that you understand that the state of nature arguments are peripheral. Anyway, so examiners expect carefully structured essay-style answers. This is important. Let's read this. The examiners expect carefully structured essay-style answers. All questions invite you to demonstrate your knowledge of the relevant literature and engage critically with that literature. So all questions, regardless of the wording of the question, do presuppose your critical engagement with the question. The question requires you to construct a critical answer and not simply to repeat and summarize the material in the subject guide. Let's look at this very carefully. Again, the question requires you to construct a critical answer and not simply to repeat and summarize the material in the subject guide. So some students have asked me, are we supposed to give an analytical answer, or is this supposed to be some kind of a description? And yeah, basically, yeah, here we see in this sentence, your essay is supposed to be an analytical essay. You are supposed to explain arguments, show your understanding of arguments, and also your critical engagement with the arguments. Analysis, criticism, counter-criticism, all the kind of thing. Let's continue. Select your material carefully. The syllabus is all about modern political theory, from Hobbes to Hegel and Marx. As such, there's an important dimension of history in the interpretation of these thinkers. You will therefore be assessed on your judgments about which aspects of the argument are necessary for your answer. So again, so this passage invites you, or what's the right phrase? Encourages you. Well, I don't say demands. I don't know. Demands or encourages you to be selective. So be selective. Don't write about everything. But so again, be broad, but not at the cost of being shallow. So yeah, we have to, be deep, and therefore our answers have to be focused. Even though broad but focused, right? A demanding feature of such a course is that it requires you to engage critically with the material in the subject guide and the wider literature. If you have mastered a chapter in the subject guide and the relevant additional reading, you will be familiar with selecting issues that are central and those that are peripheral to the questions asked. So some issues are going to be central and some issues are going to be peripheral. Again, if you're writing about the state of nature in Hobbes, sovereignty is peripheral. Likewise, if you're writing about Hegel's communitarianism, his theory of war is peripheral. So you can mention it, you can signal that you know, that you understand in the appropriate section, but do not take this as an excuse to write about war. You should make these distinctions clear in the introductory paragraph of your answer. So the introductory paragraph is very important for all sorts of reasons. You set up your answer in the introductory paragraph. Once you have made such distinctions, you will have given the examiners a clear signal about your understanding of the argument and how you propose to contribute to it. That will also allow you to devote more time to your main argument. Okay. The examiners understand that being required to make this kind of judgment can be a daunting prospect. We should point out, however, that there's no simple right answer. So this is very important. So we're going to be reading, and you have already read, hopefully, and we will be reading examiners' commentaries that give certain indications on maybe how they want to approach the question. And I constantly talk about how, this question is about a state of nature. This question is about sovereignty. This question is about this. This question is about that. These words have to be taken with a grain of salt. These words have to be taken with caution. There are no right answers, single right answers to the University of London questions. We have to keep this in mind, right? And again, like for example, in the last mock exam, we had this question about whether Rousseau is a defender or a critic of the social contract theory, and the examiner's commentaries sort of take this to be a question about the second discourse. But I think, looking at this passage, looking at these words right here, I think that if you can pull it off, if you can write a coherent answer, which also includes a sizable discussion of the social contract, I think it's good, viable. Shows your originality of your thought in general, etc., etc. So, like, I mean, I'm saying that these distinctions, these categorizations, again, what the question is about. These categorizations, especially given by the examiner's commentaries, should be taken, I think, with a grain of salt, and I think there's value in us deviating from them. Anyway, so we should point out, however, that there's no simple right answer, and that we are judging your ability to engage in a scholarly debate. To engage in a scholarly debate. Again, and this is mostly, I would imagine, for first-class honors, that sort of, in some sense, yes, the University of London invites you to take the role of a scholar, somebody who's potentially maybe writing a PhD about these philosophers. Anyway, for that reason, the examiners do not have to agree with the argument you make to judge it a good argument. So obviously, yes, there are no right answers. And again, well, all three thinkers, Hobbes and Rousseau and Hegel, are controversial. And obviously, like, I imagine, both of them can be criticized. All three can be both criticized or defended. And clearly, there is no right answer. And in fact, I'm not sure if I should say this, but in some way, if this is going to be any encouragement to any of you, I would say that, like, in my own head, I see the strengths and weaknesses of all three. And like, I can conceivably think, I can very easily see myself writing an essay defending or attacking each philosopher. Like, in my own head, in some sense, I am undecided between the strengths and weaknesses, and I think you should be too. And this position of being undecided, I think, is a characteristically important philosopher's position. It's called suspension of judgment, bracketing, refusing the temptation to jump to conclusions. Anyway, apologies. Let's go back on track. So for that reason, the examiners do not. Okay. So the key point is how you define the issue in question and how you marshal your evidence for the conclusion you draw. Carefully structure your argument. Excellent. Let's continue. In light of the above, it is very important that you give a clear account of what the question is and how your answer relates to it. So again, it's very important to interpret the question. So interpret the question. Let me write this. So interpret what the question is asking and how you plan to answer it. Let's continue. Many candidates either leave the answer until the closing paragraph, or assume that the answer will emerge from a detailed description of the relevant literature. So basically, again, so interpret the question and state the conclusion in the beginning. State the conclusion in the introduction. Many candidates either leave the answer. Hang on. A wealth of detail will only impress the examiner when it is clearly organized and directed towards a stated conclusion. So again, even though I keep talking about how I think breadth is important, and it's like you can score points, but still, as you are scoring points, you have to tie everything you talk about to the issue at hand. So again, when you talk about sovereignty by institutional acquisition, for example, the state of nature argument is relevant to that. So don't just throw it in and leave it hanging in the air, but connect it to the main argument. Show the examiners why it's important for you to mention these things. Again, for example, Taylor-Warrender thesis. I would imagine most students probably should not talk about Taylor-Warrender thesis on the question of sovereignty by institutional acquisition. But if you can pull it off, if you can show the relevance, by all means, do it. It can be done. It can be done. Not everybody can do it, but it can be done. Anyway, I don't want to get bogged down in the detail. Let me continue. So think of your answer as a structured argument rather than an unstructured conversation. To this end, the examiners are looking for. Let's look at this. Interpretation of the question and the presentation of your argument in the introductory paragraph. So again, introduction, very important. Interpretation of the question and the presentation of your argument. So not just the conclusion, but also the argument. So outline the argument. So again, in the introduction, you have to interpret the question, state the conclusion, and outline your argument for the conclusion. Okay? The second thing, right? The development and substantiation of the argument in the main body of the answer. It is not necessary to provide subheadings for your main answer if you have already set out the structure in the introduction. So I want to say, like, if it's not necessary, it means you can. So it's not necessary, but you can. So it's like whatever floats your boat. It's up to you. Maybe subheadings, but you can. But you can. Maybe subheadings could be helpful. I don't know. In general, I think that probably it's not a bad idea. Okay. Anyway, let's continue. A second conclusion. This acts as a summary of the main points of the argument and demonstrates you have completed the argument and not merely run out of time. So why did it say second conclusion? Because the first conclusion, I think, is, as far as I understand, has so oh, apologies, sound conclusion. Sorry. Okay, go back a step. So the point I was going to make is that, of course, in some sense, you already have a first conclusion in the introduction. So immediately in the introductory paragraph, you state a conclusion. And here in the concluding argument, again, in some sense, the concluding paragraph has to mirror, should be a mirror of your introductory paragraph. Let's continue. So a sound conclusion. This acts as a summary of the main points of the argument and demonstrates that you have completed the argument and not merely run out of time. Now, important bit. Always manage your time to give yourself 5 minutes to conclude your answer. Candidates who properly conclude their arguments almost always do better than those who just stop because they have run out of time. I think this is self-explanatory. Let's continue. Okay, so here's the main point, and here's actually the reason why I'm recording this video. Okay, this is the reason I'm recording this video. Let's look at this paragraph. Read widely. You are expected to read beyond the essential reading for each chapter, and also beyond the further reading. Beyond the further reading. That's very interesting. So, Alex, why haven't you told us before? Well, because we were doing essential readings. Now we have 6 weeks, which is, you know, a substantial amount of time. And I am telling you, at the beginning of these 6 weeks, right? Because we have slightly more, 6 weeks and 2 days, I think, before the exam, right? So 6 weeks and 2 days before the exam, I'm telling you, if you've mastered the basics, which you should have by now, now is the time to go beyond the further reading. Let me go back to the text. As listed in the subject guide, the selected chapter from the textbook listed in further reading will provide a list of additional secondary texts and an account of relevant debates they raise. The further reading is the full text of the thinkers. The further readings is the full text of the thinkers discussed in the subject guide and is listed in chapter 1 of the subject guide. Anyway, so what are they talking about? They're talking about Boucher. So we talk about, again, what is this? Reading beyond the further readings. It means looking at Boucher and looking at further reading at the end of the chapters in Boucher. And we've already sort of made some inroads into that. And also again, this interesting, very importantly, among other things, this means reading the works of philosophers in full. So I don't think that we really need books 3 and 4 of the Leviathan, but reading books 1 and 2 of the Leviathan in full for first-class honor students is a must. Likewise, reading the full text of the social contract and reading the full text of the second discourse is also a must for students aspiring for first-class honors. And by the way, hopefully you've done the readings already. I mean, from Khan, and I think now is maybe a good time to go back and read the text in full. And when you reread them, you will see that your understanding changes. You will read them with different eyes. So hopefully, I mean, ideally, you've already read, let's say, Leviathan once. Now you're going to read it for the second time, and you will see things you have not seen the first time. You will, like, your understanding will deepen. Anyway, so I think, again, in general, this course, this subject, in fact, political philosophy in general, in a deep sense, is about reading and rereading and rereading. And the more you read, the clearer and the deeper you go into the arguments. The clearer you see the arguments, and deeper you go into them. Anyway, so again, and I kept talking about this over and over and over again. And but let me mention this again. So among the further readings, I think from Hobbes, the clearest candidate is Gene Hampton. There are other philosophers mentioned, like Taylor Warrender, like Flamanatz, like Macpherson, and it's not a bad idea to be familiar with their arguments as well. And not to mention that, of course, when we say do the further readings, not necessarily you don't necessarily have to work word by word, through the entire book by Gene Hampton, but at least skim the book. Read the introduction, read the conclusion, maybe read one particular chapter which is relevant and important. For example, when she the chapter where she talks about Leviathan being Rebel's catechism, or where she talks about the state of nature being coordination game, right? So, and Boucher points you to specific passages in Gene Hampton, right? So anyway, so but this idea of like working through the book, not necessarily devoting a month to it, but at least gaining an understanding, fleshing out the short and very pithy sentences in Boucher, understanding what stands behind those sentences. So let me, for simplicity's sake, just because I can do it immediately on the spot. So I think for Hobbes, we're looking at Gene Hampton first. There are other philosophers, but Gene Hampton. For Rousseau, it's probably Timothy O'Hagan. So far, this is my like primary, the first name that comes to mind. But there are other names. There's Ernst Cassirer, there's Pocock, and maybe Isaiah Berlin as well. Isaiah Berlin, possibly we're going to have to devote time to Isaiah Berlin at some point. Just because his argument of positive and negative freedom is really so important to us in this course, especially for Rousseau and Hegel. And with respect to Hegel, yeah, Alan Wood and Alan Paton. I'm sure there are other texts we may want to look at, like, for example, Charles Taylor. But Alan Wood, Alan Paton, I think is a good starting point. And this, again, this is doable. This is doable. I should also mention, since I sort of forgot to mention this at the beginning, but still, it's Cambridge Companions, obviously. Cambridge Companion to Rousseau, Cambridge Companion to Hobbes, Cambridge Companion to Hegel. In fact, when we talk about Hobbes, there are 2 Cambridge Companions to Hobbes in general, which only has 1 article on Hobbes' political philosophy by Alan Ryan, and then there's Cambridge Companion to Hobbes' Leviathan. And not all articles in Cambridge Companions will be relevant. So I think when we take 2 companions to Hobbes, maybe 2 or 3 articles will be relevant. I've tried to look at articles in companion to Rousseau, and I found all of them to be way too technical for our purposes. So I'm not sure if I should recommend Cambridge Companion on Rousseau at all. And with respect to Hegel, there's a bunch of articles we may want to look at. For example, the article on Hegel's Ethics by Alan Wood, I think, is wonderful and is a must. The article by Neuhauser on Hegel's social thought in the companion to Hegel and the 19th century, I think is also very good. However, there's also a bunch of articles. There's one article on Hegel's dialectics and another one on Hegel's idealism. I don't think that those articles are really important in their entirety, but maybe to read the introduction, skim the articles, that's good, and that's not bad. For example, the article on idealism in Hegel talks about how, in a very large extent, Hegel can be seen as a continuation of Plato. And Plato was thought to be an idealist by Hegel, because Plato thought that there's the world of ideas, which is ontologically prior to the world of appearances. And there are many fruitful parallels. Obviously, there are differences, crucial, fundamental differences between Plato and Hegel, but still, there are ways in which Hegel can be, like in an oversimplified fashion, be seen as a continuation of Plato. And I think this is a conclusion which rather elucidates the point. And Alan Wood, also talking about ethics, constantly insists on seeing Hegel as a continuation of Plato and Aristotle. Thankfully, you don't really need to have command of Plato and Aristotle for the exam, or let's say of Kant for that matter. But still, familiarity, at least on some level, of these basic issues, I think is a good idea. Anyway, let me go back to the examiner's commentaries. So, yeah. Further reading, full text, blah, blah, blah. Although the selections listed in the subject guide will be sufficient, you should try to familiarize yourself with full text wherever possible. So we're talking about selected, I think selections meaning selections from philosophers. Full text, again, full text of the Leviathan, etc., etc. These texts are valuable. So again, the text of the 6 philosophers we're talking about are valuable in themselves as a part of advanced education and offer important insights to an understanding of politics. The essential reading is intended to provide the material on which the chapter commentary of the subject guide is based. The further reading found at the beginning of each chapter supplements this and helps develop a deeper understanding of the material discussed. I think the usual further reading is Boucher. In fact, I'm not sure if I can do this quickly. Hang on, I'm opening the subject guide. Yeah, so hopefully you can see what I see on my screen. So let's go to Hobbes. Yeah, so Hobbes, essential reading, selections from Kahn, right? Stephen Kahn. Further reading, David Boucher. So this is our starting point, Khan and Boucher, and then we go and read beyond Khan and Boucher. Beyond Khan, this is full first and second book of the Leviathan, and beyond Boucher is we look at references from Boucher, for example, Gene Hampton. Okay, I hope that all of this is screamingly obvious and clear to you by now. Anyway, the main texts are long, complex, and often written as engagements with a wide range of political and philosophical debates. The subject guide provides an overview of the main aspects of the argument, but there is no substitute for deeper immersion in the texts themselves. And again, especially first-class honors, like I do think that it's worthwhile for you to go back and reread those texts. And let me just mention this in passing again. I think listening to texts can be a very good and very efficient alternative to reading them, or maybe reading with the voiced version in your ears. And there's a wide range of recordings available. And also you can use voice generation software, which I use extensively, which I think boosts our reading skills immensely. And like, if you have any questions about that, about audio recordings or audio software, feel free to talk to me as always. Anyway, so approach the examination as a test of your understanding. The subject guide provides an introduction to the topic and suggestion for further reading. Just as it would be ill-advised to attempt an examination solely on the basis of the lecture handouts, so you should not regard the subject guide as sufficient preparation for the examination of a particular answer. So basically, we're talking about study guide. You absolutely have to read beyond the study guide. Now, since I'm kind of, apologies, like mostly recording this, I would imagine for first class, for students aspiring for first class honors, hopefully this is obvious to everyone that the study guide is not enough. Although I have to tell you that the study guide is interesting. And I do think that you should also reread the chapters in the study guide. It's been a long time, probably, since you've read them, and I think it's a good time to reread them. Most chapters are, in fact, I think all chapters, what's the right phrase? Reward rereading, deeper rereading. Anyway, the chapters in the subject guide are not model answers to the examination questions. You should avoid relying solely on the overview chapters and on the structure of those chapters as a model for examination answers. So again, avoid, do not do this. Modern political theory involves a series of arguments and discussions about the issues around the nature and scope of state power and individual rights, claims and obligations. Familiarity with the subject guide will allow you to see that there are a number of conflicting positions that can be held on all of these debates. Okay, wonderful. It is important that you see the task of making progress in the subject in terms of critical analytical engagement with the arguments and theories. Do not be afraid to take a position when writing your answer. Again, so I think this is very important. Do take a position. Do not sit on the fence. Take a position. If you don't have a strong position, just pick one. Like, if you do not have a strong preference one way or another, just pick one. Pick one, preferably before the exam begins. Again, and always, you see, critical and analytical engagement. Critical and analytical engagement, not just memorization. You will not be marked down because the examiners disagree with you, but bear in mind that what is most important is your ability not only to criticize the argument you disagree with, but also be willing to give the thinkers discussed the benefit of the doubt. Again, so I think it's very easy to sort of slide into this blanket criticism of Hegel and talk about, oh, he's a monarchist, he doesn't recognize women's rights. And again, Hegel has his defects. And he should be criticized for them, I think. Or at least he definitely should be open to criticism on those issues. However, when you criticize, be sure to provide the best possible defense of the views that you are criticizing. And if you have to criticize them in the end, your criticism has to be strong, has to be able to surmount those defenses. I talked about this in the past before, so let me continue. Successful critical engagement with a philosophical text involves trying to make the best possible case for a position that you wish to criticize. Wonderful, I said this a second ago. There's little merit in demonstrating the weakness of a crude and simplistic caricature. The arguments you will be dealing with in this course have attracted the attention of great minds across centuries. Remember that you are being assessed on your ability to interpret as well as criticize, and this involves making reasoned judgments. Wonderful. Okay. So I think we're almost done. Last section of the introduction. Key steps to improvement. The quality of your answer and your examination performance will depend upon a critical analytical approach to literature and theories covered in the subject guide and essential reading and further reading. Maybe let me take this as an opportunity to repeat that the key to success in this course is read, reread, and reread. Read deeply and widely. The quality of your answer sorry, yeah. So you need to read beyond the subject guide, as this approach will provide you with the additional material necessary for considered and comprehensive answer to a question posed on the examination. There is no simple rule about how much additional reading is necessary. Let me repeat this. There is no simple rule about how much additional reading is necessary. This is an interesting passage, and I think what it says is, again, it's like what the exam invites you to do is to be scholars, and there are choices and there are options. So I think some students may find it more appropriate to, let's say, if we talk about Hobbes, to just concentrate on Gene Hampton and to read like very deeply into Hampton, and they will use this to leverage as a strength in their answer. Other students will want to prefer going slightly more broadly. So there's like, I think there's a certain trade-off between depth and breadth on the one hand, and on the other hand, again, you can focus in different directions. Focus on different interpretations. So again, like Marxist interpretations of Hobbes, for example, in Macpherson. So and because of all this, there is no simple rule. And of course, some people are going to read and not understand and read superficially, but maybe they will benefit from broadness of scope. Other people will be able to read into a particular text and derive more value from them. So so in general, okay, so if there's no simple rule, how should you proceed? And I want to say is that, like, on your first pass, you need to try to cover broad ground, again, 6 weeks, keeping in mind you have other subjects, obviously, but still 6 weeks is 6 weeks. So read a bunch of stuff, try to familiarize yourself, maybe read superficially, read quickly, just to get a basic sense of what the text is about, and then see how much time you have left, how much what's that phrase, like mental force you have left in your mind to struggle through the text, and take the texts you like, take the texts that stimulate you, take the texts that interest you, and focus on them. I think, obviously speaking from experience here, I think this is a fascinating subject, and some texts I do personally find myself fascinating and tempted to go back to over and over and over again. Like, focus on those and let this be your guide. Anyway, let me go back to this. So all questions will focus on specific thinkers, but they also involve reflection on broader issues and debates. What is relevant in each case will differ. So again, let's look at this very carefully. So all questions will focus on specific thinkers, but they also invite reflections on broader issues and debates. So again, like when you are writing, so you will be writing about Hegel, Rousseau, Hobbes, and the point is that you have to write about those thinkers. So let's say when you write about Hegel, your answer has to be about Hegel. So you may refer to Hobbes or Locke or Rousseau or Kant when you write about Hegel, but only to the extent, hopefully, only to the extent that helps you explain Hegel better. It's point number one. And point number two, related to this, you can also refer to issues, talking about historical examples, First World War or failed states, when you write about Hegel or some other philosopher. But again, make sure that these issues help you answer the question at hand. So what is relevant in each case will differ. So you need to provide an explicit argument relating to the questions asked. An explicit argument relating to the question asked. You should bear in mind that the examination paper comprises questions and not simply invitations to write all you can remember. And again, let me just mention this. Many students were tempted to also talk about issues in international relations, because that's obviously a subject you're familiar with. And I think, like, in general, it's not a horrible idea. Like, of course, if it helps your answer, do it. But if you want to just stick it in just to say something, like, don't look at the question, look at the subject guide, etc., etc. Like, of course, obviously, sometimes mentioning international relations is going to be relevant. I mean, Hobbes, with his state of nature argument, international relations are in there. In his argument, he talks about how states are always, persons of sovereign authority are always in positions of gladiators. So this is relevant, or when you talk about war in Hegel. But keep it focused and keep it tied to the question. Okay. Do not provide simple biographies of the thinkers being discussed. Do not provide biographies of the thinkers being discussed. There will be occasions when biography is relevant, but you will need to show why this is so. So you talk about biography when you have to talk about biography for specific reasons, when this elucidates something about the question. Again, like in your answer. Anyway, you're being assessed on your ability to interpret and answer a question. There's something you should have practiced. This is something you should have practiced while working through the subject guide. There are a number of ways of answering the question, and no single right answer in relation to the debates covered in the subject guide. Okay. I hope this is self-explanatory. The exam for 2019-2020 will comprise 6 questions as opposed to 12. Candidates will still be expected to answer 3 questions. That will require each answer to be on a separate thinker. Candidates will no longer be able to answer 2 questions on the same thinker. Okay, let's just keep this in mind. Oh no, we gotta finish with this, I think. Yeah. So many candidates are disappointed to find that their examination performance is poorer than they expected. This can be due to a number of different reasons, etc., etc. We want to draw your attention to one particular failing: question spotting. Okay, so this is problematic because in a deep sense we have been engaged in question spotting, and to some extent, unfortunately, the exam questions from past years kind of invite question spotting because the University of London does tend to repeat questions over and over and over again. And I think there's a decent chance. That questions will be the same this year as they were in the previous years. However, we have to remember that we're in quarantine, and there's a high chance that your exam will be in a different format in this 24-hour. We do not know that for sure, but there's some indication from the University of London that you will have 24 hours to write your answer. And if that will be so, I think there's a high chance that Paul Kelly will decide to combat potential plagiarism, to rephrase the questions. So let's keep this as an open possibility, okay? Let's keep this as an open possibility, that question spotting will not work, that you will have to write answers to questions which are going to be substantially different from any questions that we have seen so far, okay? That is, confining your examination preparation to a few question topics come up in past papers for the course. This can have very serious consequences, especially may have very serious consequences this year, because who knows. We recognize that candidates will not cover all topics in the syllabus in the same depth, but you need to be aware that examiners are free to set questions about any aspect of the syllabus. So anything that's mentioned in the syllabus could be a question on the exam. This means that you need to study enough of the syllabus to enable you to answer the required number of examination questions. The syllabus can be found, blah, blah, blah. You should read syllabus carefully. Yes, examiners will vary the topics and questions. Every topic is legitimate. So although the past papers can be helpful in revision, you cannot assume the topics and specific questions that have come up in past examinations will occur again. If you rely on question spotting strategy, it is likely that you will find yourself in difficulties when you sit examination paper. We strongly advise you not to adopt this strategy. Okay. So format of the examination may change unless otherwise stated. Latest version. Okay, anyway. So Boucher, Kelly, and Khan. Excellent. Comments on specific questions, and then we're going to have comments on specific questions. So there's also a relevant section in the study guide on preparation for the exam. Although I'm not 100% sure I want to talk about this right now, but let me just take a look at it. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to look at these, to look at this advice as well. But I think that we have covered most of the stuff. Okay, so this is probably an introduction. Yeah. So examination advice. Okay. Let me look at this. So the information. Yeah. Okay. So look at VLE. Okay. So this is all terribly outdated. 4 questions. This is like a very long time ago. Dinosaurs still roam the earth when there were 4 questions in this course. Okay. So all of your, just in case, all of your questions will be graded individually, and then you'll have the sum, and the sum will be divided by not 4 but 3 in this time. So like an excellent answer to one question cannot compensate for a weak answer in another question, right? So like I hope this is screamingly obvious, but just in case. So share time equally between questions, unless there's some emergency. It's like an excellent idea to share time equally between the questions. Yeah, even if you write 2 excellent answers but fail to attempt any other question, it will be difficult to pass. Okay, remember that you're being asked to answer a question. Questions are also permissive. Anyway, so it's basically clear structure, beginning, middle, end, introductory paragraph, spell out. Yeah, so this we talked about this. Make points clearly and concisely. Do not waste time on irrelevant biographical and contextual material unless it's important, unless it clarifies. Refer to the text using author's name and short titles such as Hobbes or Leviathan. Do not give additional references unless they are correct. So some students have asked me about this, how we should refer. Wonderful. So you here you see again. So short titles such as Hobbes, Leviathan. This should be enough. Do not give additional references unless they are correct. Well, again, first class honors, probably just a name and date would be enough. So something like, I don't know, Patton, 1999, probably would be enough. You're not expected to memorize quotations. You are not expected to memorize quotations, although, but if you have good memory, it's like, whatsoever is the object of any man's appetite or desire is that which he calls good, for his part calls good. These kinds of quotations maybe have stuck in your mind. So no one will be penalized for quoting passages, although, of course, do not take this as quotes. Use quotes sparingly and use when they're really called for. Like, don't waste time simply. Like, if you have memorized, like, don't waste time memorizing and repeating quotes. Like, in general, this is not a good strategy. But again, some quotes may be illustrative. But like in general, the general rule of thumb is probably it's better to use quotes as little as possible, unless it's really necessary. And even if you use your quote, even if you quote, you still have to explain what you mean by the quote, right? So and usually once you have explained what you mean by the quote from the thinker, how you interpret the quote, you don't really need the quote anyway. So ability to paraphrase an argument, understanding, judgment, relevance. Do not get diverted. Do not get diverted into discussion of current politics. Occasionally, a current issue might illustrate a point you're trying to make. In such circumstances, you may range beyond the text, but always make sure your illustration is clear, well-focused, and relevant. This is golden words. Golden words. Always be guided by relevance. If you're not sure, then leave it out. If you have very little, time and space. It's true. Finally, your conclusion should sum up your argument, your answer. Our brief conclusion indicates you have finished and not merely run out of time. Sample examination, blah, blah, blah. You can refer to a thinker who is not mentioned in the question. For example, you might refer to Hobbes when you talk about Locke. This is perfectly acceptable, but remember to be relevant and focused. Do not use this as an excuse to write 4 answers or marks on Marx or Mill. Again, same thing. So when you are talking about current politics or historical examples or other philosophers, be short, relevant, and focused. Do not talk about everything at the same time. When you begin to answer the examination paper, take time to read it through carefully, sketch out your answer in rough notes, as this will help you to structure it. Notes will not be accepted as an answer. Give yourself time to read your answer in the final minutes of the examination. Well, I'm not sure if you're going to have time, but fine if you do. Finally, although you will not normally be penalized for poor spelling, grammar, and punctuation, you should still aim to maintain a high standard in each. Okay, and maybe also a good idea to look at the grading criteria. Okay. Apologies, technical difficulties. So let's look at the grading criteria. So 70 plus, excellent. A thorough understanding of the subject, mastery of relevant methods and techniques, extensive range and consistent accuracy of information and knowledge, fluent argument demonstrating independent critical thinking or critical insight, evidence of study outside the prescribed range of the program, outstanding presentation structure and standard of English. So this is what we're aiming for. First class honors. Let's look at this. Let's read this carefully. And the reason I'm recording this video is actually to encourage you in the remaining 6 weeks to do what? To evidence of study outside the prescribed range of the program. This is basically what I'm looking for. I'm not sure if it's a good idea to read through other. You can read the descriptions of other grades on your own. Although, just to be on the safe side, here the passing grade is 34. Now the passing grade has been shifted to 40. So basically, below third class honors now is a fail. So please keep this in mind. VLE, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I think that's basically it. Okay. So, is there anything else I want to say? I have forgotten. I'm not sure. So, just to summarize, first of all, I think it's an excellent idea for everybody to read through examiners' commentaries on their own. So, what I've done now, sit down on your own and read these texts. Look at what they're saying. I think it's a good idea and a useful idea. And my main takeaway point is, again, that hopefully, good students aiming at first class honors or second upper honors should have mastered the basic readings by now. And now is an excellent time, an opportunity, chance for everybody to take this beyond the basic readings and beyond the subject guide. And I maybe I should have begun with this, but let me just sort of mention this briefly. So that presentations, like in general, reading beyond the subject guide, I will try to incorporate this into our study program to some extent. Although I do have to aim at the least common denominator, at least in some sense, so it's going to be harder. So in encouraging you to do the reading outside of the subject guide, I am relying on your initiative. And so I have this introduced also these optional presentations for students seeking to improve their seminar grade. And the idea is basically the same. So I am looking for your initiative and your basic input. So hopefully I will be, I mean, like, hopefully this will also improve your high school of economics grade. But the main reason why we do this, of course, is to prepare for the University of London exam as well as possible. And we had 5 first-class honor marks last year, which is a substantial number, but not much. It's not too many. Only 5 people, right? So I am hoping that at least 5 students will get first-class honors this year. And broadly speaking, I think we can pull this off. Okay, so this was actually slightly longer than I planned, but hopefully, nevertheless, somewhat useful. So as always, if you have any questions, feel free to always contact me. Right now, the best way to do this is from Microsoft Teams. Otherwise, thank you so very much for your attention. Again, I hope that you found this useful, and I will see you next time. Good luck.